Hello, and welcome to Activate Presents Grow Your Mind chat sessions in collaboration with Colab. I'm your host, Anam Sethi. Welcome to the show. Today's theme is something that is very important, especially with schools opening up now, education in Pakistan, and more specifically, private education. Now, I am a product of private education as well. And I can assure you that those were perhaps some of the greatest times, the greatest memories of my life. I ended up making friends that I still have today. Being in the same classroom with the same people, we're all familiar with how it works. However, recently, private education has come under a lot of fire. Uh, with COVID and the pandemic, it seems to be getting harder and harder. So, if private schools were now being motivated to move towards more experiential, immersive ways of learning, with the pandemic, that's already been taken away. And we're all left wondering what is the best way to go from here when it comes to our children, the leaders of our nation. We have somebody very special with us today to talk to us about this. He graduated from the University of Columbia, worked with some of the leading financial institutions in the world, returned to Pakistan, and is now the Executive Director of SSS Educational Management, SEML. Please welcome, and I am so honored to host Omer Salamat. Omer, it is absolutely fantastic to have you on the show today.
No, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Lovely. So we're just going to kick off right away. Omer, you worked in the States for a while in many different roles, and then you decided to come back to Pakistan to pursue education. What inspired you to make that move?
That's a loaded question. When I was in a position to make that decision, it was a very different Pakistan. It was 2007. It was the Musharraf government. Pakistan was growing at double-digit growth rates, and I was also in a crossroad of my life, having been recently married. Then I had the choice in front of me, either to put roots down in the US, get a mortgage, have a family, get a country club membership. And then that was one option. And the other one was to return to Pakistan to be with family. And it wasn't an easy decision. It took about almost 2 to 3 years to commit myself to relocating back. And in hindsight, when I look at it, a lot of the work experience in the U.S. That always felt like technique. That wasn't a chosen path. Stemming from a particular desire to be on Wall Street or finance. It just seemed to be a very exciting, competitive place, and an excuse just to prolong the university experience in the U.S. and just stay in a fantastic place like New York City. Education seems more like instinct. The company that I work for, it started back in the house that I grew up in. My mother started a preschool called Kids Campus. So, you used to wake up to nursery rhymes and, the cars coming in. So for some reason, this feels much more second nature.
Not
Um, and,
there.
sorry, I didn't get that.
Oh, that's totally okay. We're having a little bit of an internet connectivity issue, but that's
That's okay.
not a problem. Not a
So,
problem at all. Keep going.
and in my role right now, I look over operations, business development, finance. So it's a lot of the really important skills that the finance experience taught me, but I can employ it to a growing mid-sized family-run operation. So it's been a tremendous combination of what the interest is in education and being involved with operations, but then definitely leveraging the experience that I was fortunate enough to get while being in the US.
Lovely. So I'm sure it wasn't so easy, though. I'm sure there were a lot of fears, a lot of anxieties that come along with making a transition as big as this one. And so, how did you really address those fears? What were they, and how did you conquer them?
The fear may be an overstatement. I think you get in your comfort zone, you get into your routine, and the unknown tends to at times scare you. The good thing was that I was at a point in my life where I was much younger then. So you can be reckless, you can be fearless, and I just rather than thinking about everything that was different or could go wrong, I just sort of jumped, head in into work and didn't really allow too much excess time to let those worries creep in. So coming back, we realized that this our company was a product of passion that my mother started, and as is in the issue with project, all these passion projects, they're not particularly precise. So trying to put in corporate best practices, just all the schools that we had at that particular point were running in Lahore, in Gulberg. So there was a certain amount of concentration in one geographical area. That too was moving or transitioning from being heavily residential to being very, very commercial. So taking on projects for network rollouts, diversifying into areas like DHA, Johor Town. So, frankly, there was just so much work and we were so busy that, there weren't really long periods of, anxiety or apprehension. Yes, it was a very difficult environment to operate in. When I left the US, the financial crisis took place. By the time I, relocated to Pakistan, economically things had changed. Law and order just went berserk, and that was a very, very, peculiar and difficult time to, maneuver our operations because schools were, a high risk area, and the size of responsibility of trying to protect the safety of a couple of thousand kids, that doesn't give you much time to worry about fears. You just have to sort of deal with the situation as it emerges. So I think just the underlying nature of the job was such that there weren't that many moments of anxiety to deal with, as it is.
That's great to hear. And sometimes I think it's very important for us to then immerse ourselves and push ourselves to move forward. And I really like that you have mentioned that we're not just keeping in our fears, which is a very dangerous road to go on. Moving forward, though, talking about the difficult environment now and talking about expanding, what were some of the practical challenges then that you were facing at the time, and how did you overcome those?
The main challenge in growing a business over here is that not all not all practices are institutionalized. So if I give you an example, if I was, let's say, living in the US and I decided to open a school, the process would be quite straightforward. I'm not sure it would be easy, but as what you call in the industry, your vendor selection is all institutionalized. So I would have called up a broker saying, listen, I want to open a school in this area. Please find me a piece of land. A contractor would be there. I'd apply to the education department, get a license, and get an architect, and I would be good to go. Here, unfortunately, all the ingredients have to be privately sourced, and that can make things a bit more cumbersome, lengthy, which is also one's edge as a local operator. That who whether you can open doors which are not easily openable by somebody who's not from the industry. So it took some time. It took some time to understand how locally work gets done. You've got, if you're opening a school, a majority of the first phase is real estate dependent, and trying to find source real estate either acquire it or lease it. Then going to really fun places like the LDA to get your building plan approved. Then going to yet another funner place, our education department, to get a license to operate a school. So with time, you understand how to roll with the punches, what needs to be done. So that was the biggest difference, was moving away from a sophisticated work environment to one where you need to effectively create all the steps which in a developed world might already exist. So those were, I think, some of the biggest challenges, and now it feels like second nature. If I look back, and if you ask me how to open a school now, I now know the answers. 10 years ago, there was a lot of process of iterations of making mistakes and learning from that process. So that's how things stand.
Lovely. So, if now with you having so much experience with this, what advice would you give to somebody who's 10 years behind you, just starting out with a business and trying to figure out this process of how to get any sort of business up and running in Pakistan at the moment?
Listen, it varies from industry to industry. Education, industrial, cement. These are still old economy plays. It's not like a tech startup where you mentioned collabs. Get a office space, 10 kids, a great idea, and then the world is your oyster. We are in a very brick and mortar, old-fashioned, traditional industry. Anybody who wants to start a business out right now, I think the advice is going to be quite generic, and it's going to be a reflection of one's own experience. But over here, one has to have a lot of patience. Things don't happen overnight. So, while people might have, these visions of setting up a unicorn or $1 billion, empire, overnight, things don't happen that way. We are a very, very, there are a lot of hurdles that one has to go through in setting up business over here. The ease of doing business, please do not underestimate it. Our system is not set up that way to unleash one's potential. You almost have to pry it out of all the challenges that will come your way. So it is a difficult place, but having said that, it can be done. There are a whole host of success stories in pretty much every sector. And just to give you an example, in our sector of education, one fact that a lot of people tend to, I guess, either they're not aware of it or they tend to minimize, is that it's a completely unaided sector. Not 1 rupee from any agency, government, etc. And despite that, I think this is one of the more prolific sectors. If you really think about a sector that has really grown in the last 2 to 3 decades. To all the naysayers, it can be done. Will it be easy? No. And it's not for everybody. So if you have that entrepreneurial, risk-taking, walk through walls attitude, this place, things can work out.
That's absolutely wonderful, and I'm hoping that our audience can get inspired by that, especially, like you said, if they are more inclined towards doing something like that. But let's focus on education now for a little bit, because I know all of us are here to, sort of grill you a little bit about what this is all about. So, education in Pakistan, can you first share with us the difference between private education and public education?
Well, obviously the main difference is
and I hope
public
you can hear me,
education.
but if not, we'll have Omer right back. Our goal today is to really understand, break down the walls and understand the realities of education in Pakistan.
So I hope you can hear me. I think the question was the difference between private and public education. the short answer is obviously public education being run, controlled, driven by the government, and everything else you can lump into some sort of private education. Now, if I break down the private education sector, again, what people don't really realize is the majority of the private education sector is highly fragmented, and it serves a very low-income population. When you think about private sector, you hear about names like Habit, Lahore Grammar, Kids Campus, SciCas, Beacon House, City School. Together, collectively, with the number of customers that we and these particular networks cater to, probably will not amount to even 10% of the market share. The private sector or the private schools, the vast majority would be ones which range from as little as paying 500 rupees per month, going up to about 4,000 rupees per month, and that's where the private sector is. So that's one really has to understand that dynamic, and then you have obviously the private schools in highly urbanized tier one markets, and then you have private schools in areas like Rajanpur, Muzaffargarh, but the irony is that a lot of the ills and the issues with uh, the unregulated private school market are used and cited to draw up policies for the privileged private schools. So that's where the mismatch is right now. And I think as an industry, if you think about, again, there are all kinds of labels that get thrown around, like, elite private schools, which I just cannot get my head around because, when I was applying to college, there were maybe 2 or 3 schools that you could use as stepping stones to get into the leading colleges of the world. And I think it's as an industry, we can be all very proud to say that today you may have 50 to 60 such institutions all across Pakistan that give you that theoretical chance to apply and get in with, mind you, scholarship and financial aid into the most privileged universities of the world. So rather than being elite, at least your privileged private schools have really democratized the access to reasonable quality education in Pakistan. So that is where I think that's been the biggest success of private schooling, taking away market share from the icons of schooling, such as Aitchison College or Karachi Grammar School, and maybe 1 or 2 of the American schools that would have been set up by the local American embassies or consulates. So that has been, I think, one of the biggest, changes and contributions that private schools have made. And I was in a conference earlier today, and just somebody said that just imagine Pakistan right now and strip away all the private schools. What would that landscape look like? And I think that would look like a pretty scary one. So, that's pretty much where private schooling stands today, and, how it's kind of evolved over the last 20, 30 years.
Wow. First of all, a lot of information that I personally did not know about private schools, Omer. I think you are absolutely right. When we think of private schools, we tend to gravitate towards a few icons in the industry, but the reality is that there is so much more out there. That being said, you and I have had a conversation prior to this where you mentioned the politicization of private schools, private education, and why that can be so dangerous. So I would love for you to share that with your audience, with my audience, now that we know what you just told us.
You're right. I mean, this is a very unfortunate development that started in 2015. It stemmed from the rise of the urban middle class vote favoring, an emerging party, now the incumbent PTI, and the then incumbents, the PMLN, felt a bit insecure about the rise of this political party, and decided to use school fees as one of the political tools which to appeal to, the voters. Private schools in Punjab since 2015, just again statistics, headline tuition fee has only gone up by about 4.2%, whereas schools, the two main inputs are payroll, and the real estate component, which is lease or rent. In an industry where trained, qualified, capable teachers are hard to find, um, our wage inflation in a typical school, they run in double digits. So we've had to work in an environment where our input costs are going up double digit, whereas fee increase has been now, effectively realized at a modest single digit number. Now, schools are trying to figure out how to work in this unsustainable environment where costs are going up per market forces, but school fees have been politicized, and so the outlook for private schooling is looking quite scary. These headwinds have been there for a while. Schools have had to shut down. The service quality has to dilute. Just to give you an idea, like if the government, they've got this law in place which was implemented in 2015, that schools can only increase fees by 5%, and if they get the regulators' approval, can increase fees up to 8%. But I always try and explain to somebody that a fresh graduate, let's say, of Kinnaid College or LSE or LUMS, decides to come into this profession. As a fresh teacher, let's say you're teaching primary school and your salary is set at 30,000 rupees per month. After an entire year's training and experience, if I were to apply the 5% magic formula onto somebody's salary, that would go up to 31,500. And I don't think anybody would be quite excited about any such compensation, increments. So this is just not sustainable. I know this movement has been started off with a fringe, or a small percentage of very vocal parents at certain schools. But the idea is that I think the vast majority currently is being very short-sighted about it. They're seeing the fees are obviously quite tightly regulated, but what they're not really realizing is that when you extrapolate the present situation, and you sort of fast forward 5 to 10 years, I can assure you that the status quo is not going to remain as is. And at the end of the day, what's going to happen is people are going to either, the school operators are going to diversify into new industries. Teachers will figure out, they'll transition out of this industry and figure out other roles. And at the end of the day, who's going to suffer? The students are going to suffer. The quality of education is going to suffer. And that has a very significant and dark consequences for a country with 220 million, growing admittedly at 3%. So something has to change. But unfortunately, this has become such a sensitive issue that I don't think leaving it to politicians is going to really solve anything. Because just to give you an example of a school, you take one school with 500 children. They come along with 1,000 parents, 40 or 50 teachers, a couple of people in school admin. So when you leave this to the politicians, they're like, okay, let's try and appease the parents. So in my almost 10 years working in private schooling, I've suffered or I've seen three different governments. It was the People's Party government, you had the Noon League, now you have PTI. Not one initiative has been taken that I can actually identify as being, let alone pro schools, being pro education. So, the trend line and where things are headed, frankly, that does concern me quite a bit now.
Absolutely, and I have heard so many times this whole rhetoric that schools have become their businesses, money minting machines. This whole thing that they're always increasing the fees, and it almost seems to be something that is so commonly believed that perhaps it's very important for us to then question the reality of what's actually going on. With that said, there is then also this other rhetoric that schools are not adequately equipped. Oh, we don't have the same facilities as people do outside, in the Western world. Our teachers are not properly trained, etc., etc. So, Omer, I'll ask you then this: do you think that our teachers, our facilities are adequately trained? Our administrators are adequately trained to take on the job?
Listen, Anam, these again. First, if I can address what you raised earlier, these
Yes.
sweeping statements are so misleading, immature,
Hmm.
but unfortunately, the conversation continues to pander to the lowest common denominator. I often wonder that when you say that schools have become these money minting machines, I think for a discerning parent trying to choose which school to select for their children, it should be the case that you should ask the school whether it actually breaks even, makes money, because that should be a very important criteria for you as a parent, to make a well-informed decision. Why would a parent want to, enroll their kid in a school that is losing money? That is not a sustainable proposition. So when you think about, on the flip side, when you think about, large institutions, colleges like, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Columbia, Dartmouth, have you, they always advertise their endowments as a indicator of their financial health, which then has implication on how much scholarships they can give their prospective students, what kind of research they can actually undertake. So here we've kind of tried to demonize schools by saying that, oh, they're making so much money. But if that's the case, I would love to know how many new industry participants have come into the K through 12 schooling space. I can't even think of one. I think the same operators that they were there 30 years ago are still trying to survive, figure out how it works. And yes, a strong operator, a school that people are wanting to send the kids to, will be making money because they've got good capacity utilization, they've got the headcount coming in. So that is a reality. And if somebody wants to shame a school for saying that it's making money, I think it's a compliment. I think there are also schools which are not making money. Now, to your second part, whether are schools perfect? Absolutely not. Do we have this culture of teacher training, professional development? At best, it's sporadic. But that's also then reflective of where we are. We can't say that we are in a developing country, but we have characteristics in our education that mimic developed countries. Are all schools accredited? No. Are all teachers trained? No. In terms of facilities, it varies. If you think about schools that have opened 3 or 4 years from now, you'll see customization, architectural consistencies, resources, facilities, grounds, labs. But schools which are, let's say, a 20 or 25-year-old vintage
Yeah.
and open up in, let's say, areas like Gulberg, they're not equipped that way. So schools were 30 years ago. Uh, the reality has changed drastically. You will see in certain instances foreign qualified principals, administrators that are reasonably trained. And I would always encourage people to make a very well informed decision. They should ask these questions. I can't take one brush stroke and paint and use it to, across the landscape of all private schools. So if somebody, these questions should be asked to schools that, what is their professional development program, what is the teacher training program for a particular school. And I think if these are the questions that get asked, rather than, oh, what your fee structure is, when is the fee due, I think the market will actually force schools to comply with these requirements of teacher training, adequate facilities, etc., etc. So I think as everybody has to play their part in there, and if the conversation goes away from fee and into the content of a particular school, you'll see that the content also then will change and
Absolutely, Umar. Thank you so much for that. Now, with the pandemic, I feel like everything is suddenly changing again. And in your opinion, how has private school education transformed after these last few months we've had?
Oh, I mean, it's the world is split for
Yeah,
private schools, pre-March and post-March. Pre-March, we were all like traditional brick and mortar, putting things in copies, pen to paper. Uh, but now the reality is that we are in a new normal. And now, when you think about, I think every kid has got on our device, virtual classes, distance learning program, online classes. This is the new, I think it's the topic of the day, that how students are coping with online. But I think one thing that COVID has done really well is it's accelerated certain trends, which is technology like Google Meet, Zoom, Microsoft Teams. They've become very, very strong, technology aids, which are going to help schools even once the pandemic is over and done with. Especially in our geography, I think that I don't see online education substituting traditional forms of teaching and learning, but it will act as a very, very strong supplementary tool. Now, let's say COVID is not, it's no longer there. We have law and order situations where schools have got to shut down. We've got scenarios where, we've got event-driven school closures where the PSL matches are taking place in Gulberg, and Gulberg schools have to shut down for multiple days, if not weeks. So we now have developed capabilities where the process of learning can continue despite there being interruptions in the traditional school schedules. So while it may not be perfect, it's very, very important to realize that the process of learning does not have to stop. And I think as an industry, switching from the traditional brick and mortar, coming to school, the teacher, the in-person, we have done a tremendous job in trying to transform and accept and harness the online tools to teach children. Before March, I don't think a private school operator could say that, listen, we've equipped our teachers for
right,
dealing with the online and full-time online. It's not like just coming in for a few hours. You, in some
right.
cases, had to replicate entire outcome-driven, especially for O levels and A levels. That the students had to be taught new content. So, if you look about the distance learning program, they were divided between those what we call outcome driven, that new content is being shared with students, and they're being tested on it, and they're being held accountable for whatever transpired in the online. And then you had, like, basic learning, revision of concepts for the primary or the preschoolers, that whatever they were taught in person through till March, a lot of that was being repeated, so that the familiarity with these concepts was retained. So the new normal, I think everybody has got to accept it, harness it, understand it that this is very, very incredible, powerful technology, and it should be a recurring theme in education going forward. Like, for example, if I think schools are also improving their capabilities, that just because you're not able to come to school or you have a sick day, if you have the ability to dial into your class, that's a huge that's going to make a significant impact on how current a student stays, and you're also eliminating excuses, like, not only from the student side. A lot of times you have a teacher is not able to come to school for whatever reason.
Right.
Uh, so now the teacher can communicate to the students in so many different ways. We adopted technology and we became a Google Classroom, company about 7 or 8 years ago. So we were just using the Google Classroom as a framework. But now, and it's such a delight that when the pandemic hit, technology became accessible. It opened up. It wasn't as if Google actually took away features from the standard Google Meet and Google Classroom. It actually made the premium features available for free so that everybody could benefit from them. Same thing with Zoom. Zoom had, limits on how long you can actually take a Zoom class free of cost, and they actually improved those standards to make technology inclusive. So I think the service providers, and clearly there have been issues. We do live in Pakistan. If you had a class of 20 to 25 people at any given day, if there could be 16 or 17 kids participating in a particular class, in their virtual class, that to us was what we considered that as a success. And we obviously, the issues were, there were hardware constraints, that a family had one laptop, three kids, and three concurrently scheduled online classes. So the parent had to take an executive decision then on who to give that laptop to. So but I think we're headed in the right direction, and I think the way the industry adopted was at nothing short of warp speed. That by the end of March, early April, most of the schools had some form of virtual learning taking place. And
Right.
the last 6 months have been a learning exercise: what works, what doesn't work, where to film a class, whether you have synchronous or asynchronous lessons being recorded and shared with parents. And I think this is going to improve with time as people get more and more comfortable. But also on the flip side, what was truly remarkable was how easy these virtual learning protocols were for the children, especially the younger children. They were so comfortable with it, and that was always going to be a question mark for whether will kids relate to this technology. The kids were years ahead of where the schools even were. So they knew how to navigate their way through Zoom, Google Meet, and these are the two of the more popular programs. And it was actually quite interesting to see that the younger kids were far more comfortable receiving this form of education, and the reluctance actually came on the part of the educators, which were a bit skeptical whether the children would actually, would actually take to this new method of learning, which I can assure you that the children did quite easily.
That's absolutely fantastic to hear, and I agree with you. Sometimes we can underestimate the children, the children of this country and children of the world, but they can be sharper than we expect. What advice do you have for parents then? How can parents support their children through the learning process today?
I think parents, once obviously the practical issues that, please get
Okay.
proper internet, get devices, give children within reasonable control a laptop or a tablet if you can. and engage with the child. Just figure out absorption through the online platform varies from child to child. I think the programs also have to realize what works. Trying to get a child to come from 8 in the morning till 2 p.m. sitting in front of a laptop can have non-academic issues as well. Their eyesight issues, their attention issues. A child can just simply, for lack of a better word, just get distracted and bored. So I think both sides need to communicate that what is working, what is not working. Certain subjects lend themselves better to be taught online. Others require a more traditional in-person uh, 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 setup. So, and the process of iteration has to continue. And I think, but I think what is very clear is that everybody needs to accept the new normal, accept this technology, and figure out how best to harness this technology to the best of their ability. I think that would be my basic advice to parents.
That's absolutely wonderful, and I think that's going to be helpful to a lot of us. As a final question, and this is something we always like to ask our mentors because I guess we are also always looking for ways to grow and develop. You are constantly surrounded with with the development of others, right? Children of the world, country, education. What do you do in your life for yourself when it comes to self-care and self-development?
Well, one is the physical aspect of it. I try and maintain that if you feel good, if you have to be physically fit just to cope with so many realities, your energy, your stamina, your daily ability, your concentration span. So I'm quite I'm a bit of a sports nut that I'm fortunate enough to be able to play squash 4 or 5 times a day. I'll encourage my kids to come with me for golf and just to keep yourself mentally active. But then I think what is also equally important is to figure out that the process of learning, your mind also is a muscle. That curiosity about what's happening, and it could be from something as basic as social media. That just picking up news, reading articles,
Right.
keeping abreast with what's happening in the world. So the University of Life, you should always be a full-time student of. They're changing patterns, changing themes of what's happening in the world, and you've got to stay current. Yes, if you subscribe or underwrite only to local standards, over time you will just realize that professionally, intellectually, you just become obsolete. So, one way to really keep, the process of personal development to grow, traveling is the most incredible part. If you find certain things lacking here, depressing, open your mind, go somewhere, explore different cultures, see what's working out there, be observant. Read the room, see what's happening in a room around you, what's making sense of you. Stop, maybe if you stop engaging with local media, stop listening to local news, read a book. So there are ways just to keep current, and some people do it well, others tend to be a bit lazy, but whatever gets people going.
Thank you so much, Omer. That was such a helpful conversation. And I think today we've learned so much about education. We all have a lot to say about it, but I think seldom did we ever get an insight. So thank you for joining us on our show today. I hope that the audience also greatly enjoyed the show. This has been absolutely fantastic.
No, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, so that was Omer Salamat, and I hope that you tuned in and got to learn a little bit more about how private education works and what actually goes on. Lots of meaningful conversation, and I hope that we paid attention to a lot of assumptions that we tend to make and how we can run our mind to question the reality and dig deeper. This brings us to our gym task, and In case you haven't guessed it, it's tied to something that our mentor said today. The University of Life, what a beautiful sentiment. And the idea is this week, let's stay current. Then let's see what happens when we read up on what's going on in the world around us, when we read up on how education actually works, when we dig deeper, ask the right questions, and communicate with the right people. I'm sure that if we manage to keep ourselves engaged with the world, with our surroundings, perhaps there will be something to be found there about ourselves as well. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Anam Sethi signing off from Activate Grow Your Mind chat session. I'll see you next.